Hello, welcome back. I'm super excited for today's conversation. I'm here with Blake Guichet, host of Crappy Christian Podcast, and I actually found you from your book
Okay.
first, which is Confessions of a Crappy Christian, which the name alone pulled me in because I was like, well, we all are, so why wouldn't I read a book like this? But I'm always here for the honest conversation and truth. I think that's one of the biggest things that I struggled with younger going to church. Was raised in a Presbyterian church, and it always felt rule based, and it felt
Mhm.
very, hide everything type of a thing. And I've just appreciated as I've gotten older, I've gotten more bold and more just transparent of like, well, no, this is my life and this is how it is. And I screw up and it's okay, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that that is the title that you have. And that's what drew me in because I always appreciate just a real honest conversation.
Yeah. Same.
What led you into that path and writing the book and the podcast? And
Yeah. So the podcast came first, actually. The podcast is Confessions of a Crappy Christian as well. And so that I started in 2018. It was actually my 30th birthday present to myself. And um I was in deep it like postpartum, two young kids, husband working 70, 80 hours a week. And I had just discovered podcasts. I actually found like the serial crime
yeah,
podcast first. And I thought that that was what all podcasts were. And then I was like, oh, wait, there's a Christian podcast? This is cool. But then, and this is a long time ago. And so the podcasting landscape has changed pretty significantly since then. But it was all very fluffy and very pink and flowers. It's just never been my gig. And, God really gave me the verses in Second Corinthians 12 where Paul talks about, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And that was what I was looking for that. I was looking for someone that was being honest about what they were going through. And my mental health was awful, like through the floor bad. But I couldn't find anybody that was talking about that honestly, kind of in the midst of it. And I just kind of felt like I was like, okay, if you can't find it, make it.
yeah,
And so I did, and it was scary. I mean, I had less than 900 followers on Instagram, and those were all people who I was a wedding coordinator before I had my second child. And so that was like brides and mothers of the bride and friends and people that I'd like found that I loved that had followed me back, like no social media to speak of. And I launched my podcast and it took off pretty quickly. And I attribute that all to like the favor of God and also just that I was creating something that I think people were looking for. And it was especially in the beginning, and the show's been around for 5.5 years. So it's morphed pretty significantly. But those early episodes were really focused on mental health and motherhood and just being honest about the hard stuff that I was going through it. So I kind of really hit the ground running on just kind of painful transparency, right? Like it's not
yeah,
easy to show up and be like, I cry a lot. And like sometimes I question my decision to become a mother.
yeah.
And so that's morphed over time in 2020, really, 2020 and 2021. Uh, which I mean, we can go into that as much as you want to. I know that's like anytime somebody says 2020, you're like, where is this going to go? But I, everything was crazy. And again, it was kind of like a repeat of 2018
Yeah,
where I'm sitting here going, something's not right with the way that things are playing out.
yeah.
And I couldn't find anybody that was saying that. And so I just started saying it. And it was kind of this second boom of the podcast and the Instagram. And that was when I signed my book deal. And so it's kind of just been that ever since. So now I kind of get to do like a 1-2 punch, which is fun. I get to tell the truth about Jesus and who he is and what he says about us. And also like, hey, the government doesn't care about you. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So yeah, it's just kind of this conglomerate of all of the things that I'm passionate about that people just keep showing up for.
And I love it because there's a boldness that's required in it, right? There's a boldness in the beginning of even just sharing your behind the scenes and where
Mhm.
you're at, because nobody does talk about it, or especially at that time. I feel like people are more, but especially at that time, people weren't talking about it. In 2018, I had our first, and I struggled with postpartum depression. But being in the fitness field and being a nutritionist,
Mhm.
I had this unforeseen expectation on myself. Well, you should just have it all handled and it all should
Right.
be good. And there was a shame in that of I don't have it all handled and I am struggling and I
Yeah.
am not being kind to my husband. I am not being kind to myself, right? And nobody was talking about it at
Yeah.
that point. And I remember the first time I said something about that, the amount of people that came in saying, "Thank you so much for discussing this." That it's really hard to put it out there because it's very vulnerable, but also the amount of people that just find grace and can find comfort and see themselves in that is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. That was the biggest thing I had to offer people, and I think still have to offer people, is just solidarity and
Yeah.
just being like, it's never just you. No
Yeah.
matter what it is never just you. And when you say that, you honestly extend a lifeline to people. And I've had people that I follow extend that lifeline to me, and so that is really, the internet can be messy and ugly and dark, but it is also a really beautiful space that we get to connect with people that are, I mean, you're literally across the country from me,
Yeah.
and we get to connect and do this kind of stuff. And that's because of the internet. And social media. And so I think when we use it for good, that's the outcome, is people feel seen and known and heard and loved and less alone in their stuff, because these are difficult conversations to have.
Well, I was just reading through the Bible too this morning in Matthew, where Jesus is explaining to his disciples about, his second coming and what that's really going to look like. And it's not rainbows and butterflies
No.
and flowers. And you're reading through it, and I think a lot of times this perspective of being a Christian is going to just be this easy path, and everybody's going to understand and agree with you, and it's just going to be so great. And actually, it's the opposite. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're not going to have joy and fulfillment in that, because you will. But if you read through the Bible and truly look, there's a lot of boldness that happens in there, and that's really what that faith is.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's two sides of that coin, right? That it tells us that Jesus says the world will hate you, but it hated me first.
Hmm.
Right. And I do think that we get a taste of that. We get a drop in the bucket, especially living in America. We get a drop in the bucket of what that looks like, especially comparatively to these places where this conversation is illegal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, we also get, there's also a lot of scripture that talks about when things get rough, when things get bad, when there is pressure from all sides, that is when you experience the fullness of the Holy Spirit and the fullness of, Christ in you. And so even in yes, you're going to suffer, and yes, people are going to hate you, but all that's going to do is refine you and make you look more like Jesus and experience more of him. Like, it's like even the worst of it still is good news. And
Yeah.
there is, to me, like, there is no other religion that offers that to us.
Yeah. Let's chat about 2020, because
Yeah.
the boldness in that, right? I think there are a lot of Christians who have a lot to say and genuinely have strong feelings, but struggle with how to put those out there, or what platform to communicate, or what their ministry is in something. And especially in that time frame, finding your words in the right way when everything is so divisive
Yeah.
and becomes an emotional reaction in there, you do really well at navigating those conversations, I feel like.
Thank you.
I follow your stuff and I'm like, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I just don't know how to put the words in it. How do you navigate that and communicating that out?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Jesus. Honestly, so, like, full transparency, it does get to me sometimes. And
Yeah.
it literally last week. It's funny, the things where you're like, I swear I'm never telling anybody this. And then Jesus is like, you should tell this story on a podcast. So the 4th of July is a notoriously, in the last 4 years, just a terrible time to be patriotic on the internet. Like
Yeah.
people, I'm like, you get 364 days a year to crap all over your country. We can't have 24 hours
Yeah.
to like blow stuff up and listen to Toby Keith. I mean, for
Yeah.
crying out loud. But by the, so I actually recycled my 4th of July post from last year, and it's by and large people being equally patriotic and thankful that we have the rights that we have. But it got the anti-American rhetoric got to me last week. And that's when I know I need to put the internet away. And like, I
Yeah.
literally took 3 days off and just turned it off. And I'm thankful that I now can listen to the Holy Spirit when he's like, all right, that's enough. Put it down, put it away, take Instagram off your phone. You're getting angry. That nothing good comes from that. And the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit does not function that way. And people don't hear Jesus when you are that way. And I had to learn that lesson the hard way, because I do think there is a righteous anger, not about that. There are things to be righteously angry about, and we can show up in that. And if
Yeah.
it's, when that's functioning through the Holy Spirit, people will still see Jesus in that. I mean, I know people like, he flipped tables. He
Yeah.
brandished a whip. Like Jesus got snippy with the Pharisees and his disciples. Like it's not that. It's when it's like, I'm pissed. I don't like you. I want to
Yeah.
say something to hurt you back. That's when I know I have to push myself all the way back away from the table and, reset my mind. But it's been a long time. Like the 4th of July pushed me there, but it's been a long time since I've gotten there, because I'm not campaigning for a candidate. I'm not campaigning for a cause. I'm really genuinely not even trying to show up and convince people to think the way that I think. The reason that I think it's easy, or I don't know if I use the word easy, but the reason I'm able to show up the way that I am is because of what you just said, because I know what it's like to have something to say and nobody is saying it,
Mm-hmm.
and then to have the words to say it, what it feels like to feel represented.
Yeah.
And I felt that way in 2018 with my mental health. And so now I get the opportunity to do that for other people in a more like political, cultural sphere. And a lot of it is that I love this stuff. I've
Yeah.
loved politics and policy and all of that since I was a kid. Like, I was a weird kid that like liked this stuff. And so now it's just paying off in my 30s. And so I think having an understanding of it. I was also talking to my friend yesterday about, I really feel like God gave me this very niche gift to take kind of large, lofty ideas and condense them down and make them understandable. And I
Yeah.
feel like I have the capacity to do that theologically, politically, culturally. And like, that's really helpful for people that don't have a large, like an understanding of what's happening around them. And so I think I'm just doing the same thing that I've done the whole time, which is trying to make this stuff understandable and give a voice to people who feel voiceless, right?
Yeah.
Like it is, I mean, after 2020 and 2021, like the cancel culture and the mob mentality and the people literally having their livelihoods taken away because they came out and said, hey, maybe this vaccine won't protect you from getting COVID, like, which we now know is true. But when you said that back then, you got wiped off the internet. I think people are just thankful to have someone that's like saying what they're thinking. And like, I do try, that's kind of bring it full circle. I try to do it in a way that is kind and that isn't condescending. And it's just like, hey, here's another option, and try to push myself away from the table when I can't communicate that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that's healthy emotional management, right? In there too. And I think that is something, if you're really trying to pull people together, that is how you do it. Is it's
Yeah.
okay to own truth, right? And communicate that, but also do it in a way that is compassionate enough for somebody else's perspective and
Yeah.
side so that they can come there. No one is going to listen to you when you come out with hatred or emotional reactions or anything. If you're truly trying to, you're not trying to pull somebody on a political side, right? At the end of the
Right.
day, it's not about a Republican or a Democrat vote. It's about pulling people closer to Jesus. And if you're
Right.
really trying to do that, then I think the number one thing that we hear from people, and a reason why they don't like Christians is because of the hypocrisy or the judgment. And if you can do that without that there, and you can
Yeah.
truly show people this really is the love of Jesus. Yes, he spoke truth. Yes, he, may have gone against what somebody believed and he may have shaken things up a little bit, but he did it with love at the end of
Yeah.
the day. I think that's truly what we're meant to do in the first place.
I agree. I do think, unfortunately, especially in the time that we're living in today, you can show up as kind and compassionate
Yes.
and however, and people are still going to be like, you're a hateful Christian because you don't affirm their lifestyle or agree with their politics. I literally had someone send me a DM yesterday about like what a hateful Christian I am and that I'm the reason that people don't like Christians. And I'm like, okay, like I can't, I don't think I can do this any better. I
Yeah.
mean, I always want to be better, but like I know that I'm doing my best. I know that I'm trying to show up in a way that exemplifies Christ. So like just because I'm voting for someone different doesn't make me a hateful Christian. It just makes us different and we see things differently, So I think there's again like there's two sides to that as well of sometimes people are just going to believe and see what they want to see. But I
Yes.
also see Christians do this really badly on a regular basis where you're like, oh, God, no, no, wait, I don't want to be affiliated with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was, especially in 2020, the timing of seeing what came out, how it transpired. I was teaching group fitness for a larger fitness company and I quit because we originally in Michigan were not mandated to wear a mask at certain stages. And then when the vaccine came out, it was either you get the vaccine or you have to start putting a mask on. And it
Yep.
was like, okay, so
Yep.
basically put a scarlet letter over my face for me to
Yep.
show up to work every day and have to explain to everybody why I chose not to get a vaccine. One,
Which
that's
is
my own
insane.
medical choice, right?
Right.
Why should I have to explain to people who don't even know me why I did it? And I left and I shared my opinion in a kind way with the company of how I felt. And I was saying, like, how can you as a company proclaim yourself as pro-choice, proclaim yourself as these things, but at the same time, I either have to show you all of my medical records for why I can't receive this thing because of the health things that I've experienced,
Mm-hmm.
or I have to paint a scarlet letter on my face or leave my job.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how we'll find hypocrisy in the things that we want to find it in, but not in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, if I get one more comment or DM about Trump being a tyrant, I'm like, are you voting for the guy that tried to make everybody get an experimental vaccine or make them lose their livelihood? You want to have that conversation? Like yeah. And it is, look, like I unapologetically I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I plan to vote for him. I voted for him in 2020. I plan to vote for him in 2024. He also gets on every single nerve I've got. And he's not a perfect candidate. And he's, and it's like people will hear the first about 15 words of that sentence I just said, and then they black out. And they're
Yes.
like, oh, well, then you're like a Trumper and you want to take all of women's rights away and you are a conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer. And I'm like, okay. Like I literally saw a TikTok today that I meant to reshare it. And the guy was like, I don't have I actually don't have an argumentative bone in my body. I don't show up on the internet and say these things to argue with people. I'm trying to give voice to the thousands of people that I know that feel voiceless and feel unrepresented and don't feel like there's anybody, articulating their cause. I am not here to argue with you because I think you're as wrong as you think I am. Like,
Yeah.
we are my husband and I were talking the other day, like we are so freaking divided as a
Yeah.
country. And that started in the Obama era and has just been on an absolute fast track since 2020. And it breaks my heart. Like it breaks my heart. I don't want to lose. I mean, we've lost friends. We've had family that like we've had to distance ourselves from. Like that is all I think a part of the plan. Like I fully believe that is what they want. They want us divided because if we worked together, then we would see that the government is actually the enemy, not one another.
Yeah.
And so I don't show up to the internet to like get in verbal sparring matches with people. I'm just trying to share what I believe the same way that you are, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and well, you can divide and conquer, right? That's the way that we usually do things. And when you can get people to dislike each other, you can get them to see or miss that they actually have more in common with each other
Exactly.
than they do different. Um,
Exactly.
I can't remember his name, but there was somebody that I had listened to on another podcast who is a black man and actually went to speak with KKK members, and the amount of people that he converted from the KKK by just sitting down and having a conversation with them.
Yeah.
Someone sitting across the table with someone who they know hates them because of the
Yeah.
color of their skin, and having a conversation and being able to realize that they have way more in common with each other than they do different. And
Exactly.
imagine if we could do that in our country today.
100%. And it would, but it's very difficult to get people to come to that table now.
Yeah. It is very easy to lose sight too. Our church said it the best a few weeks ago. He was saying if you are getting more passionate about politics right now than you are about sharing the love of Jesus, then you're missing the whole point.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
was like, yeah, that's so true because I
It
hear
is.
everybody get so hung up.
Yeah. And you know, like I talk a lot of politics on my platform, and I always try to bring it back to Jesus. I believe that there's a direct pipeline from discovering that the government doesn't actually care about you to coming to the truth that Jesus is the only one who does.
Hmm.
And so I like to believe that I like get to like stand on the end of that pipeline and just usher people down it is my hope. And I've a lot of people have like DM'd and reached out and said that. And I do think that like Christians need to be more educated about politics. Like the
Yeah.
country is in the position that it is today because the church sat on the sidelines, because the government said, hey, you guys sit on the bench. You go ahead and sit this one out. They told us that in the 60s, and we very willingly went quietly and calmly. And I think that's why the country looks the way that it does today. And so I think that you can do both. I do think you can do both. And I agree with what your church is saying. And
Yeah.
I don't ever want to lose sight of that. But I also don't want one more voice telling Christians that they don't belong in the political arena, because like I said, I think that that's all of these issues that the government has successfully convinced people are political are deeply biblical. Like
Yes.
so deeply biblical.
Yes.
Gender is biblical. Children are gods, and they are arrows in our quiver, not to be mutilated, but to be sent out into the earth and to change it. And the right to life is biblical, and all of those things. Our country was founded on the belief that our rights are God-given.
Hmm.
And so like I said, we've sat this one out for long enough, I think. And
Yep.
I think that under the Biden regime, a lot of Christians are getting off the sidelines because they can see the writing on the wall. They can see where this is going.
There's absolutely a shift I see happening. I see it among a lot of entrepreneurs who are Christian who are starting to be way more bold. I mean,
Yep.
we transitioned our business to being faith-based last year because I just kept feeling this nudge that we needed to change the conversation. And I fully agree with you. I have watched, and there's a reason we left the previous church that we were at. I love a lot of the people that were there, but I kept saying to my husband, this isn't it. Something is missing here. And I'm not feeling that discernment. And I'm feeling a lot of like staying quiet about the things that like we truly need to come together on and have conversations about, but we're shying away from it out of
Yep.
fear of
Yeah.
upsetting somebody or out of fear. And I said, that's not what it's supposed to be for.
No. And we actually had the same exact experience last year. We left the church that we'd been at for over 7 years and went to a church that, like, I don't need every sermon to be a political diatribe. I don't think that
Yes.
that's healthy. But you cannot have something like October 7th happen and not mention it from the pulpit. Like, that's just insane to me that, like, I just could no longer be in a church that was living in a bubble, that was pretending like what was happening out in the world wasn't happening. Because if you're not shepherding your flock to accurately and responsibly navigate what's happening out in the world, then the world's going to come in. Like,
Yeah.
that bubble's not going to last real long. And like you said, whether it's for the fear of stepping on toes or hurting people's feelings or being too controversial, I think people forget that the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees were the Jews' government. Like they were the political body, and Jesus went toe to frickin' toe with them every time he got the chance. So
Yeah.
people are like, Jesus wasn't involved in politics. No, that's part of why they killed him.
Yeah.
That's part of because he came to challenge their political systems, and so I think I literally had dinner with 3 girlfriends last night, and two of them were saying the same thing of like, I just don't know if I want to go to church anymore that like doesn't ever talk about what's happening in the world. I don't want you to tell me how to vote. I think that that's
Yeah.
like extraordinarily unhealthy. I don't want you to tell me what to believe, but so the way I knew that we were at the church we needed to be at was like literally the second or third time we were there. And the pastor was giving a sermon on just the state of the American church and what we've been through over the last 4 years. I mean, they made us
Yeah.
close our doors and stop gathering, and they arrested people for trying to get together for church. Like that's freaking North Korea level stuff. And, and then they were like, everybody had this belief that once COVID was over, everybody would come flooding back, and then they didn't. And so he was just talking about all of that. And he made this comment. And he was like, they ever try to do that again, they ever try to close our doors again, y'all just go ahead and take a special offering for my bail, because I'm not doing it again. And I like wanted to stand on my chair. I was like, that is what I'm looking for, is someone that's like this far and no further. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot you can do. You cannot make us stop gathering. And they did, and we let them,
I my husband and I in 2020, I was pregnant through July of 2020. And in the beginning, I was like, what is everybody freaking out about? And I kept saying to my husband over, I was like, am I losing my mind? Like, am I the crazy one here that I'm not Cloroxing our bananas, and I'm not, wiping off all our groceries before they come in the house. And
Yeah,
and I fully understand, right, that it was absolutely fear taking over.
without a doubt.
But I found it more shocking that people weren't shocked at the response from people, because I said to my husband, this didn't happen overnight. This came in compounding interest, just
Yeah,
like you said, right? It came in at the time of we were starting to separate the church from a lot of the conversations. And this was not an overnight thing, because if it was, people would have fought against that way
100%.
more. But it's
Yep.
a slow breakdown, just like
Yep.
it is in any situation.
Since 1962. They took prayer
Yes.
out of schools in 19, I think it was either 1960 or 1962. That has been setting the stage
Yeah.
for a really long time. And look, I'll be honest, I Cloroxed my groceries for 2 weeks. I believed in 2 weeks to slow what was it? 2 weeks to
To flatten the curve.
slow the curve,
Yeah.
whatever it was. But once that 2 weeks was over, I was like, no, what are we doing here? My parents, who basically like were helping me raise my children, hadn't seen their grandchildren in 2 weeks. And like that was when I was like, and like I didn't play the game after that, but I can't wait to tell my grandchildren one day that we Cloroxed bananas like a bunch of crazies.
My great aunt, who had no one else besides my mom, had dementia and was in hospice care. And Michigan was bad. Michigan was
Michigan
really
was
bad.
bad.
She passed away in 2021, and she didn't get to see anybody the last year of her life. My mom would stand outside her window to say hi to her, and it was heartbreaking for my mom. And I almost thank God that my great aunt at that time didn't have much of a memory left,
Yeah.
because I just kept saying to my mom, that is not how I would want the end of my life. If it meant I
Like makes me
like
want to
short,
cry. Like
yeah. If it meant I shortened my life by 6 months, then so be it. If I could be with the people that I
exactly.
loved and wanted to be with. And just the fact that people had that choice taken away from them is the
Yeah.
saddest part
Well,
out of
and
it all.
you like if you gave birth in July of 2020, like you didn't get to have visitors. Your
No.
husband didn't get to come to your final ultrasounds. Like I remember that grieving that I didn't have COVID babies, but I remember grieving that for so many friends, because there are so few experiences like in life, like having a baby and then all the people that you love. Like I don't know why I'm so emotional about this. All
Yeah.
the people that you love flooding in that door and like meeting this new human that you just brought into the world. That
Yeah.
is such an unmatched experience. And so many people were robbed of that. And now we know on the other side that like those babies would have been fine. Those
Yes.
babies would have been fine as long as nobody like sneezed in their freaking faces, like, which hopefully we're not doing that anyway. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, yeah, like there was so much taken from so many people by fear. and by government regulation.
My
And it
daughter
what's
was 2.5 at that time. She didn't get to meet her little brother when he was born. We had to bring him home. My mom didn't get to come be in the hospital. We had to have a babysitter come be with her and my mom come be with her. And I mean, I got out of the hospital a lot faster, which was fantastic.
that was a
But
nice
that was
nice
great.
byproduct. Yeah.
Yeah. But I went into labor. Luckily, my labor was fast. I wanted a natural birth. I thought this was going to be our last kid. Well, it is our last kid, but I wanted it to go the way it didn't go with my first.
Mm.
And I wanted to be in a natural birthing center. The whole thing, just when you look back and I'm like, none of this made sense.
It really
They
didn't.
COVID tested me. They did not COVID test my husband, but he didn't have any restrictions with the baby. I couldn't go in the natural birthing center right away because something about COVID in the wallpaper, if I had it. And I was like, come on, this whole thing. And I said to my husband, I'm like, I know I don't want another kid, but I almost do because I'm grieving this like
A
last birth
hundred
that I didn't get
percent.
to have. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. I
Yeah.
think, like I said, a lot of people, I mean, that's just birth. Like like think about people that were in homes or hospital. Like, I mean, it's just, we will look back. I mean, we already do
Hmm.
look back on that time in history. And it was, I mean, it was crimes against humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. But when I said to my husband, I'm like, I don't know why people are so shocked that people are complying with this like this because we have spent decades
Yeah.
basically forming
Yeah.
something like this occurring and, putting this fear and dependency in
Yeah.
people onto somebody else to provide for them and provide that safety and security that
Yeah.
only Jesus can. But we've now had decades of generations going through schools where this isn't discussed and it's not a part of their life. And um, that's the challenging part. And when people in this world, in today's age, think like, oh, you're just making a big deal out of that, that's not going to happen. I'm like, yes, it is. And it's slowly happening in small little increments now.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
We've talked about, I know you're homeschooling and can
Mhm.
move in that direction, and I'm secretly following your stuff because it's just something that's kind of been on my heart, but I don't know if it's the time to pull the trigger yet.
Yeah.
But I have said to my husband, I'm like, I don't want to make this decision out of fear. I want to make this decision because it's the right thing for our kids. So I know it's not time
100%.
for me to do it. But it is something that we've looked at and something that we explore because it is. Where do you draw the line, right? Of I know that my children are going to be exposed to things and they should be because I need to teach them healthy discernment. But then what is the level of exposing them to something that I can't, turn that around
Well,
at some point?
do they need to be exposed to it? Like,
Yeah.
at what, like, I think that's, I think that's, say this in like the kindest way. I think that's a lie that a lot of us have believed.
Yeah.
That I had this conversation with a friend yesterday, literally yesterday, about sometimes I've had a couple of people. We did not make the decision out of fear at all. Like, we made the decision to homeschool out of this is what is best for my kids. Both of
Yeah.
my kids have some learning differences. They need the one-on-one attention. My job and our life allows for this. I kind of got to the point where I was like, why are my kids at school for 8 hours a day? And then coming home and doing homework, and then they're exhausted and dysregulated when like our life would very easily allow for them to be home. So this was not a fear-based decision at all. But there is also the aspect of I want to preserve my children's childhood as long as possible. Like, I have a
Yes.
9 and 7-year-old. They are children.
Yeah.
There are 9-year-olds that my 9-year-old knows that behave as though they are 17
Mm-hmm.
because of what they've been exposed to, because either like their parents are allowing them to have unfettered access to the internet, or they were exposed to it by somebody else's parent is letting them, like, it's just such a ripple effect. And I reject the notion that my child needs to be exposed to bullying or gender
Yeah.
ideology or whatever it is outside of me introducing those things to them in a way that shows them right and wrong and what is good for them and what is not good for them. and allows them to move forward justly. And like the crazy blue hairs will be like, well, that's brainwashing. You mean the brainwashing that you're doing in the public school system right now with your rainbow flag waving and, telling children that they're trapped in the wrong body? Like, no, this is not brainwashing. This is what has been accepted as truth and appropriate for children for centuries. Centuries. This is a
Well,
completely new belief system that kids need to be exposed to that. No, no.
well, 1,000%. I made decisions to get tattoos when I was 18 years old. And I've had them removed because I was not emotionally developed enough to get some of the tattoos that I got at that age.
Yeah,
And I've
yeah,
said to my husband, I'm like, that's not a decision I probably should have made at 18.
right.
And it, thank God, was not a permanent decision that I could get them removed. But even knowing what I know about hormones,
Yeah,
that's not a decision I want my daughter, to be making at a young age with something along those lines, or even having to have those conversations because she's not emotionally developed enough to
no,
understand what she's doing, what it is, or anything along those lines. And there is proof of exposing kids to things like that at young ages and what it does to them later in
100%.
life and
It's
what
a
it pulls
social
in.
contagion.
Yeah.
Like my 9-year-old can't put herself to bed at an appropriate time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
she is still a child. She is
Yeah.
still very innocent. My 9-year-old still plays with dolls and loves to like create and make. And I want to preserve that as long as possible. And it's not that it's not possible to do that with your children in school. It 100% is. And that's why I'm really thankful to be able to say this wasn't a fear-based decision for us. Like
Yeah.
all of the things that we're talking about right now was genuinely so low on the totem pole
Yeah.
of our decision to homeschool. And it was fully because we felt like this was what God was calling us to. And
Yeah.
I am scared to freaking death. I just want to be like super duper clear about that. Like we start school on Monday. I still work. I still help support our family. I still have something that like I love and I'm passionate about. And I am every single morning going, God, you called us to this. I know that you are not going to abandon me in it. I know that you are going to like grow my capacity and give me help and help me balance this. And I believe that, but I am saying that to convince myself, like like I am preaching truth to myself so that it'll start to feel like truth. Like we did not make this decision lightly.
Mhm.
And I have no idea what I'm doing at all, except for the things that I have figured out. I'm so thankful that there's so many incredible resources and people. I mean, my best friend for the last 10 years has never sent her children to school. Like God gave me her for the season that we are walking into, and so it's a huge life altering decision. Like I knew that it was, and then I got into it and I was like, this is literally a life-changing decision. And so
Yeah.
I understand why people are like, I feel like maybe I could, but I don't know. And I encourage people all the time, like you cannot make this decision out of fear because then you will homeschool out of fear.
Yes. Yeah.
You will homeschool out of like scarcity and you'll put your kids in a bubble. And then like that is how you end up with weird homeschool kids and like the 90s stereotype. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
but you know, when you make the decision out of abundance and out of like I really believe this is what God's walking us into, at least for this season, then it's so much easier to just be like, if God called us to it, he's not going to like just leave us at the doorstep.
I love your reasoning too, right? I mean, obviously being in women's health and working through those things with people, I watch it in my kids, the nervous system impact and the being in school for 8 hours a day. My daughter right now thrives in it. She
Mhm.
loves it. She loves structure. She does really good in those things. My son at 3 years old was telling me his eyebrow hurt for why he couldn't go to school.
Mhm.
And I see it in him. One, I don't think the way that we structure school is set up for boys at all
Oh
because
gosh, no.
that's where
Yeah.
I think a lot of ADHD, I'm like, is it really ADHD or is he just in the wrong environment because he's a
Are
boy
you
and he's meant
asking
to be
him to
wild at
sit
heart?
still for
Yes.
6 hours a day,
Yes. Boys are meant to function differently than girls. And
Yeah.
I watched that from the very beginning. And I've said to my husband, if the second we start to get those conversations coming up, that's when I know we have to pull and we have to
Yeah,
make a different decision because I mean, I watch women who work 8 hours a day and are juggling after school stuff and are juggling all these things, and then their hormones are impacted because they're not feeling good. And I'm like, if I'm feeling that as an adult, imagine what my child is feeling being in that
exactly.
environment.
Exactly. And that was really where we got was both of my girls were so freaking dysregulated,
Yeah.
and they would get in the car and they'd be fighting with each other and they'd be like upset that I didn't bring the exact snack that they wanted. And it was like, these are not my kids. These are not my children because the school that they were at was a 4-day-a-week school. And so by Saturday morning, I would start to see glimpses of my kids again.
Yeah.
And, but then it was Sunday, by Sunday afternoon, we were all like getting along and back in our rhythm. And I was like, oh, I gotta like freaking ship them out again tomorrow. And
Yep.
they, my youngest was the same way. It was like something always hurt or didn't feel good. And she just did not want to go to school. And so, yeah, I say all the time, like, if you asked me to make a list of the reasons that we homeschool, I would need a couple of days. Like
Yeah.
there's so many reasons. But the biggest one I think truly is, this is a bold statement to make, but I could no longer convince myself that being at school for 8 hours a day was what was best for my kids.
Yeah.
Like
No, I
there
agree
was
with
no
you.
way I could like position myself and be like, yeah, this is what's best for them.
Yeah.
So we
My
made the jump.
husband's argument is athletics because he was a college athlete, really good. And I'm like, I don't mean to break your heart, but I was average at best when it comes to
Yeah. Well, and
athletics. So,
also the great news is that you put them in rec ball when they're younger and then they can play on any high school team.
yeah.
Like there is my best friend that I mentioned earlier, her son is a freaking monster on the baseball field. Like they spend their weekends playing, he plays travel ball and he's freaking good. And he will probably get like scouted by a high school and potentially go on and play in college,
Yeah.
like if he wants to.
Yeah.
So, and look, I have a whole podcast episode if somebody's listening and they're like, not to try to like pitch my podcast, but
Yeah.
it was really helpful for a lot of people because my husband took a really long time to get on board. It took him about 2.5 years of me praying and by a complete miracle of the Holy Spirit, managing to be like kind and compassionate and understanding and not just be like, you're an idiot, we're homeschooling our children, which is like totally God. Like we recorded a whole podcast episode about all of his fears, all of his concerns, what held him back. And it was everything from socialization to like feeling ill-equipped to do it, to nobody, like what if they're weird, to like nobody in our family has ever done this before. Like, and every single argument, issue, concern that he had an answer.
I love
Every
that.
single one of them. And
We'll
I
have to
mean,
link
and
it here.
now I like overhear him in public settings being the one that's like excited and like he's the one answering those questions and is like, one of his big ones was, we're not like, what if we're not smart enough to teach them? And I was like, so I will never forget his face when my response was, so you want to continue to send them through the system that left you feeling ill-equipped to teach them?
Really great point.
He was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, So that just as a resource that may be helpful for people to, if they're the ones that they're like their spouse has, there are some husbands out there that are like pushing to homeschool and the wife is like, there's no way I can't do this, or has all those same concerns. It was a fun episode to record because it was a little bit of like, I was right.
I love that. We'll link that in here. Thank you so much for being here. I love your boldness. We will link Blake's Instagram if you don't follow her already, your podcast, and link to your book as well. But I appreciate everything you put out there.
I love this. This went by so fast.
I know. I looked at the time. I was like, oh, okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.